and gentlemen, good morning, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome back to the plenary room. For the past 3 days, as you have witnessed, the city of Rabat has been buzzing with the energy, with your energy, with innovation related to Africa Investment Forum. Now, we turn our focus to one of the most pressing and promising areas for Africa's future, energy transition. So, as you know, we stand at a pivotal crossroad because on one hand, the continent holds immense potential for renewable energy, and on the other hand, significant challenges remain in mobilizing the investment and expertise needed to transform this potential into large-scale, impactful projects. Today, this panel will delve into opportunities and obstacles shaping Africa's clean energy journey. It is now my privilege to introduce a visionary leader at the forefront of Africa's infrastructure development. Please, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Mr. Alain Ebobisse, CEO of AIF24, to deliver the opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues, distinguished guests, partners. I wanted to say excellencies, but we are here to do work, so we don't have to use protocols. We are all partners, colleagues, doers. Well, it's a privilege to welcome you to this panel, Investing in Africa's Green Energy Future, here at the African Investment Forum. Today's discussion could not be more timely because Africa finds itself at a crossroad for green growth. A crossroad where we can choose a path where we are victims to the adverse impact and havoc climate change is wreaking on our economies, or a path where we seek to create new industries, define new growth pathways for our citizens, and deliver new skills. You guess which one I'm choosing? The path where we see the opportunities. Now, in 2024, global energy investment will surpass $3 trillion for the first time. Yet, Africa is set to receive less than 4% of these funds. And we have many of those figures that we can talk about. And yet, it is the African people who bear the brunt of this funding shortfall because, of course, we also know another figure, and this will be the last one that I will give, but it's important. Over 680 million Africans across the continent still lack access to electricity, which is a stark reminder of the important work before us. That's it. I won't talk about gloom and doom anymore because I'm going to talk about the opportunities. Because Africa's state of energy and security for us represent a significant opportunity. We see a huge opportunity to invest in renewable energy in Africa, in transmission projects, in generation projects, with very decent returns. Certainly returns which are substantially higher than what we see in Europe or the US, for example. So the potential for investors is clear, and we have to transform that potential into reality. The region is the place where robust returns and tangible impact meet on a scale, I want to emphasize that, on a scale that is unmatched and never seen before. But these opportunities will not be exploited unless we as a collective community act with speed. So I mentioned scale, now I'm mentioning speed. Two words that I like to mention as much as possible: scale and speed. And this is why we are gathered today. Now, let me start by commending the African Development Bank and the World Bank for their decisive leadership in launching the Mission 300 initiative. This is a transformative initiative. It aims to connect 300 million people to electricity by 2030. These are the kind of bold initiatives that we want to see. Has never been seen before. It's a very ambitious undertaking. But also, it's an initiative with the potential to generate significant returns, because what the African Development Bank and the World Bank Group are saying is that, of course, public sector will play a role, but they are welcoming the private sector. Also at Africa50, we are fully committed to playing a role in making this vision a reality. We know that achieving the goals that we have set under the Mission 300 initiative will require both grid connection and off-grid solutions. Africa50, the company that I'm leading, is actively driving progress on both fronts. We are developing an ambitious program across the continent, which includes Africa's first transmission line public-private partnership project that we are doing in Kenya, a first of its kind in Africa. We are doing the first independent power transmission in Africa, where we are bringing the private sector into financing transmission. We see many countries now adopting the IPT, independent power transmission model. Yesterday, we had a boardroom with Mozambique where we presented to investors another set of independent power transmission projects, and the investors' interest was quite high. Here at the African Investment Forum also, we signed an agreement with the International Solar Alliance to operationalize and manage the Africa Solar Facility, investing up to $200 million of off-grid solutions. Again, there is money for grid, there should be money for off-grid. We believe that this is the kind of initiatives, it's still small, but it's the beginning that we need to see. So all of that also needs to go with creating new skills, creating jobs, developing technologies that will enable us to improve the living conditions in underserved communities that are impatient for change. Now, to close, a persistent narrative around Africa green energy development is the lack of bankable projects. I would say the limited volume of bankable projects, because we have quite a few, but we need to have a lot more. Project bankability is not a given. It's an outcome of a coordinated and well-supported project development process. It requires intentional collaboration between the private and the public sector. We have a few developers here in the panel and certainly in the room. This is why Africa50 is proud to be the fund manager for the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa, AGIA. We're managing the Project Development Fund, which is a $400 million blended capital fund facility, sponsored by the African Development Bank, the African Union Commission, and Africa50, with several investors and partners who are with us today, including, of course, the African Development Bank, of course, the sponsor and the leader, BOAD, BADEA, TDB, many other investors, including, we should say, G7 countries, which are supporting us for this initiative to create the biggest project development vehicles that we have seen in Africa so far, to build a pipeline of bankable projects that will generate up to $10 billion of green infrastructure investments in Africa. This is a bold initiative of the African Development Bank by the chairman, my chairman, Chairman Adesina, President Adesina of the African Development Bank. Honestly, this is the kind of initiative that we need to move the needle. Right now, at Africa50, we have about $100 million of project development funds that we can allocate to develop a pipeline of bankable projects. Asia will increase this by 4 times. So this is the kind of things that we need to do to change the game. Now, Africa 50 envisions a future in which both the public sector and the private sector players collaborate to make Africa green transition not just a challenge to solve, but a rewarding commercial opportunity that uplifts the lives of hundreds of millions of Africans across the continent. The journey to this future begins here, and it begins today. These panels bring together a wealth of experience to explore innovative financing models. I'm very impressed by the participants in the panel. That's probably why they didn't put me on the panel, because they are better than me. They asked me to say a few words, which I totally acknowledge. And they will share successful example of what has worked, and they will focus on how we can scale up, and I hope we also can talk about how we can speed up. Because scale is good, but we have to do it at speed. The needs are urgent. So I look forward to an engaging discussion. Thank you. Let's delve into the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alain Boubissé, for your insightful and forward-looking opening remarks. Thank you very much. And to guide us, as I said, through the next discussion, allow me to introduce our moderator, and be assured that his expertise will add immense value to today's discussion. A warm welcome to Vice President for Power, Energy, Climate, and Green Growth at the African Development Bank Group, Dr. Kevin Kariuki, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Today we have, as Alain suggested, a very, very fantastic panel. And I'm sure that the discussion we are going to have today will enrich all of us in this particular subject of Africa's green energy future. To start with, I'll invite my first panelist, Dr. Mohamed Mohildin, who is the director at GFunds Africa. Please come over. GFunds stands for Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. It's followed by Fatma, an executive director of strategy and monitoring at Masen, a Moroccan government entity responsible for leading renewable energy initiatives in Morocco. Then we have Taz Avanpour. She's the CEO of Temis, a very active developer on the continent. Then we have our own Wale Shonibare, our Director for Energy Financial Solutions, Policy and Regulation. And then we have Richard Nelson, the coordinator of USAID's Power Africa. And you will see that in assembling this panel, the idea is to make sure that we have a mutually supportive or complementing perspectives that will cover the entire area that we are looking at. So to start with, I will start with Dr. Mohildin. Dr. Mohildin, we all know that the key driver for renewable energy investments is climate. And so, of course, we know that the cost of renewable energy technologies have come down, but the key driver is climate. So I'll start with you, because you are the COP27 champion, and you are also involved a lot in the UAE consensus. So at the UAE consensus at COP28, It called for the tripling of global renewable energy capacity by 2030. Acknowledging this goal as an essential enabler of all global efforts to keep 1.5 degrees Celsius alive and advance sustainable development. My first question to you. IRENA reports that the world is not on track to meet this goal. Why do you think this is so, and how could this situation be remedied?
Right, thank you so much, and good morning to you all. It's a great pleasure. It's a great pleasure to be with you here. And so I had an intention that everything that Alain said, I was going to refute and challenge, but as always, he said the right things, especially in issues related to speed and scale. And if we go to the good old African metaphor about if you want to go far, you want to go with a group, and if you want to go fast, you may need to do it on your own. We don't have this kind of luxury of choice. We need to do both, fast and with the group to go far. Thing is here, and in answering your question, why we are not really achieving what we should, because of the three things of the enablers, on the finance, on the technology, and in the behavioral change that would allow us to bridge the gaps on energy. When it comes to finance, it remains insufficient, inefficient, and unfair at the global level. When it comes to technology, we know now, each time that we are talking about the technologies allowing us to do better when it comes to renewable energy. Last time I was in London in July during the Climate Week, and some of us were bragging about the fact that the cost of producing electricity from solar had been reduced by 90%. That figure was corrected to be 98% reduction compared to the cost back 10 years ago. And then when it comes to behavioral change, we don't really have adequate incentives, and I see still, despite what Alain mentioned about the potential and the opportunities for the private sector, there is still a great deal of disincentivizing the private sector, including crowding out that we see in this area. So we can remain just talking about obstacles and impediments, but there are solutions, as we know now. If we are waiting for the solutions to come from the global system alone, we might be waiting for long. And we have seen recently about the announcement of the 300 billion. Well, better than expected, but less than hoped for. And it's all about the competition to get the money. And then today, we just released a piece with my good friend Dawood Sambini, and while we're hoping for more coming from IDA, which is basically one of its areas of work focusing on the low-income countries of Africa, we hoped for more than 100 billion, but at best we'll get the 100 billion. So what can we do about that? There are three things that we can do in the three areas of action that I just mentioned. First is to correct the bad perceptions. And in preparation of this discussion, I just got the update of the October release of the Global Emerging Markets Risk Database, the GEMS, analysis of the investor perceptions. We know that it's our responsibility today that this kind of bragging that, yes, there are opportunities, but risks are high. Well, yes, there are risks everywhere, including the OECD countries. But based on this recent update, that the default of the credit of the private sector exposed to the African continent is much, much less than being perceived. And actually, there are opportunities. And where are the losses? It's not just about the African countries and the African people do not get their fair share of investments, but basically for decent investments for the private sector around the world, including from African investors, that should be flowing to the right direction. But for that, the job for the regional development bank, like the African Development Bank or the Asian or the Islamic Development Bank, which is more than regional, actually adequately presented here with engineer Hani Sumbul, and the work of the World Bank, not just to provide finance, but to provide updates on knowledge and to be more than support when it comes to risk mitigators. Investors today are asking for more of a toolkit for risk insurance, taking the first loss, getting where the investments in energy should be going. This is one area. The second thing is basically about getting ready for business. The latest update coming from the World Bank about doing business which is basically the new report under Business Ready, many African countries need to get their act together. And I think we need to go beyond the point raised by Alan related to the pipeline, because the pipeline of bankable and I would say even investable projects, as demonstrated during the 3 days here, there are many opportunities. But there could be other things related to policies, related to regulations, rule of law, issues that we can really work together for in order to improve the bankability and the investability of these projects. Latest figures coming from the World Bank, IMF, and others about potential growth for the continent is around 2 to 4%. But surprise, surprise, the economists quoted the IMF that out of the 20 countries with high growth for 2025, half of them are African countries. 9 of them are African countries. And if you are adding the North African countries, because unfortunately they were only quoting the sub-Saharan, this could be close to a dozen if you are going to include countries like Morocco going forward. So the growth is there, but we need to support this growth with a momentum beyond the transactional support into having this kind of institutional support for reforms. This is all about dealing with the insufficiency of funds, the inefficiency because it takes more than needed for the investors to wait for some of the public finance institutions to release their money. And I know that the African Development Bank is doing better in cutting the time for releasing the funds. And then in the unfairness, I would say it comes in different ways, because we are more reliant on debt instruments that now need to have more private equity participation. There is heavy concentration in some countries and in some sectors, including in renewables. And the other thing is basically about this issue of lack of correctness of the bad perception that is basically contributing to the bias. And the very final thing is basically about the technology. We are in a model, when we're in a model, that we're relying on the following: inventions from the US and Europe when it comes to technology of renewables, and then a bit of adaptation and innovation from the African investors and the regulators to support this invention and innovation. And finally, production at scale from China when it comes to solar energy and components to wind farms. I think this model is being challenged because of the deglobalization and the tensions. So every effort led, and I got some good briefing from colleagues about the talks about capturing the value add and investing more in the value chain that could minimize this kind of heavy reliance on sources of innovation and invention from outside the continent, where we can really invest in the all elements of the supply chain to minimize the risks and enhance the opportunities. Otherwise, we could be just cruising at the speed that we have, which could be, for some people say, well, it's better than nothing. But I think the potential here is telling us that we can do better in the forefronts when it comes to finance, in the technology and adapting the technology, and the behavioral change that could be supported with better incentives.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muhyiddin. But before you go, because you've talked about what development partners could be able to support to be able to reduce this risk, I want to address one issue. And this is the issue that a key constraint in Africa is the risk premium. You've already hinted at it, that is ascribed to the investments on the continent. More specifically, what is your perspective on the actual credit risk as well versus the perceived risk?
Right. Well, actually, the continent is huge, and you can really see now, not just on the 10 countries I mentioned by number, but there are many opportunities even beyond those 10 countries that would need more granularity when it comes to risk analysis and the risk profiles that we need to know more about. This is one area. Second, that we are confused about different roles. People keep complaining about credit rating agencies, while their job is basically about issues related to risk when it comes to the sovereign borrowing or corporate borrowing outside or inside the countries when they are relying on debt. But when it comes to areas related to private equity participation, the granularity of understanding of the data and what could be the best offer when it comes to return and cost could really be addressed better. The other thing that we have seen from 3 institutions, and I may fail to quote others, but from the Inter-American Development Bank, from the African Development Bank, and more recently from the World Bank, and I understand that the Islamic Development Bank is doing some work as well in advancing the toolkit. And now when you go and go through this kind of list from insurance, from dealing with the loss, the first loss, when areas related to co-finance, and then with possibilities of entering today and with a phasing out plan, all of these kind of tools of risk are basically identifying the cost premium better, but actually dealing with what we need more, which is basically the kind of insurance, and not just to stop at the bragging that, yes, there are opportunities, but what are you doing exactly as MDBs and other risk mitigators in order to improve the understanding when it comes to the cost premium, the actual cost premium, and compare it to the perception, which has something to do better to do with knowledge sharing and updating information.
Thank you very much. Very, very enlightening. I think I'll go to you, Fatma. We've heard what Dr. Moghuldin is saying, that what needs to be done by MDBs to reduce or to be able to attract more investments on the continent. And also he went into the granularity of the risk aspect. But on Wednesday, Minister Laila Ben Ali articulated a very coherent energy transition pathway being pursued by Morocco. What is the role of Mazen in implementing this transition pathway? And is Morocco on target to meet its ambitious goal of increasing the share of renewable energy from 42% of installed capacity in 2020 to 52% by 2030? That's the first question for you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the Moroccan experience in renewable energy. And as you mentioned, Morocco, under the enlightened vision of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, has really defined the strategy, the way forward for Morocco to reach its objective. So it's very, very important, also key enabler in that, to have a clear vision, clear objectives in where we could deploy our efforts at the end. So Morocco, as you mentioned, has established this objective of having more than 52% of its green electricity from renewables, so by 2030. And where are we standing right now? We're at about more than 5,000 megawatts of renewable that are currently operational. So we are right on the way with almost 44% of our capacity from green electricity. And also mentioning the speed and acceleration, we have also a clear roadmap of projects that are either under development right now, or on financial close, or on the construction phase. So we can mention, for example, for our past projects, and I think many of the partners in the room here have also been involved in our first projects, for example, the Noor Ouarzazate solar complex of 580 megawatts that are operational, and I think this gives also the way for other solar solutions. We have been also working on other type of wind projects like the Kouj Bayda projects, the repowering of it, and I think it's worth mentioning as well because it was one of the first wind projects in Africa, and came at a time where obviously technology has evolved, and it made also sense to look at it again and see how we could repower this asset and give the best value of the resource we have in this region. The way forward now is definitely to accelerate. We have in the pipeline 3,000 megawatt of solar currently under development, and more than 1,500 wind as well. Also looking at every time, looking at what is the market is ready to provide. So this is really the approach from the beginning, to have a clear structure based on the objective we want. What is the market available, be it on the technical side, from the developer side, be it on the financial side. I think there's been a lot of innovations on all those aspects. So this is really key when we structure the project, is to re-question ourselves on the readiness on the various actors and find the best structuring of the projects in order at the end to have the best risk allocation and the best cost and the best service for the end user. So in this, let's say, roadmap or pathway, we are looking now, for example, our next project is the complex of Noord-Middelt. It will be based on the utility scale battery with photovoltaic solutions, but also looking on the wind side at any opportunity to improve that. So the road is clear. We're really at Mazen. A few words. Mazen is the entity in charge of deploying the renewable energy project in a complementary way with the private sector. So this is also key in Morocco, where we have various actors. We have clear laws also to facilitate the deployment of those, either for the private sector, but also through institutions like Mazen. So total engagement to speed up, to accelerate, and reach our objectives by before 2030.
Very.
And maybe just a last word, because this is also very important for us. As a publicly owned institution, we're definitely looking at reaching the goals of our energy needs locally, but also how we can positively impact all our ecosystem, either from contributing to the industrial involvement of our local industry in the projects, also having a look at how to foster, you mentioned that, it's important to have a skilled also personnel in order to deploy all those projects. So we're also contributing in various Moroccan institutions to train the workers of tomorrow, of today and tomorrow in these projects. And finally, we're doing all this to ensure a positive impact on our territories. So we're also involved in looking at the population surrounding our project, how we can contribute either from a employment perspective, definitely economic perspective, but also social activities that we are involved with the local authorities, obviously, and other actors in charge. So this is our integrated approach, as we call it, have the green, best, competitive, reliable green electricity that have a positive impact on our territories.
Very, very, very impressive. And, because of the coherence, you are basically talking like you are ministers. So this is very, very impressive. But so, are there any lessons in actualizing the transition pathway that the rest of Africa, especially Sub-Saharan Africa, could emulate from Morocco?
Well, I think one of the main, there are many takeaways, definitely. I mentioned a few of them. With the clear vision and objectives when supported by the government. I think this makes also very clear pathway for private investors, so that's key. The regulatory framework is definitely important, but maybe I will focus on one key element which I think, we have to look at every country's specific needs. So we really have to be adaptive in the way we are either structuring or proposing solutions for the projects to be deployed. The transition in one country is not the same as another country, so it's really looking at adapting the projects to the specific needs of the country. So here in Morocco, we have the chance to rely on a strong grid network, which also has plans to invest more to be able to integrate more and more renewables. But we definitely understand that grid-connected solutions are not the only solutions. And renewable energy has also been an innovative response in crisis management as well. If we can give the example of the unfortunate earthquake that Morocco has known in 2023, this renewable energy was also a solution for the shelters, camps, for the displaced population, where solar projects with batteries were implemented in a very fast way to respond to the specific needs. So Mazen is also very much engaged, and Morocco more generally, with the African continent and with the African partners in seeing how we can accelerate the deployment of renewable energy on the continent, either by sharing our common experience. We're talking about also a key success factor, but also the challenges that we can face in these areas as well, but also with providing technical assistance, in which we found it interesting in initiatives where we have financial partners like the African Development Bank or other financial institutions, and we have Mazen, our experience, so we can provide technical assistance for developing the projects, and of course the main actors in the countries which are the end clients. So we've been doing that either on a bilateral or multilateral way for the whole value chain. So looking at initially the resource, how we can best evaluate the resource, what are the best sites to start the project, what is the appropriate structuring of the projects up to the construction and the operation also. So I think this is very key and important that all these are well planned in advance to make sure that when we start the project, all the key elements are already on the table. So this is the approach we have been deploying so far.
Thank you very much. I think the big takeaway there is that transition is not a one-size-fits-all, but alignment at the government level, at the system level is required. I think now I'll move very quickly to Taz. You have been involved in the development of privately financed projects, some of which have been extremely difficult and taken inordinate time to close. From a developer's perspective and personal experience, why do you think it is challenging for Africa to attract renewable energy investments?
Thank you, Kevin. And thank you for including me in this panel. We've been working together on many challenges. Maybe a little bit about Temis. Temis is a project developer and investor in Africa. We are 10 years old. We have 2 projects operational. We have a pipeline of, actually, portfolio of 460 megawatt in different stages under development, and which is going to create 2.7 billion investment opportunities for the market in debt and equity. We also have 300 megawatt of pipeline, which is about to come to the portfolio as the project development phase. So what are the challenges? Maybe I should start with first with the capital. I believe after being in Africa for 15 years, 5 years at the bank, and then also as a developer, 10 years, one should be resilient, one should be extremely patient, and one should be committed. These 2 skill sets are extremely important. It starts with the capital. Once projects are fully developed, everybody is ready to invest in those projects. But, coming to that level requires substantial investments from the developer side. When I started Madagascar project, someone told me that 1 billion, no one will finance this. I told that person, I would like to see that day. I would like to reach to end of the project development. I know everybody is going to come. My main concern is, until I reach that point, what are going to be my challenges? Project development requires substantial investment, similar to startups by venture capital firms. Unfortunately, that capital is not available. I am very happy to hear from Alan. He mentioned the new capital raise. But I would like to base this discussion mainly on examples. 2 examples. In 2013, we started 2 projects, one in Rwanda, the other one is in Ivory Coast. One hydro, one thermal. I mean, it doesn't make big difference. You do exactly the same work for both projects. Rwanda project, capital was readily available. Ivory Coast project, we had to raise the capital. Year 3, we start the construction in Rwanda. Year 3, we saw the first dollar for hydro project in Ivory Coast. I'm still proud of this project. I think during the opening ceremony, all of you watched the video, and the project was actually mentioned there. I mean, I think it is the only privately developed hydro project in West Africa, and rich financial close with bridge financing, and door-to-door to commercial operation is 7 years. Still, it's a big success, but we are not satisfied. So one is the capital. If development capital is available, developers are going to go more projects and develop much more quicker, and then reach the financial close and start the construction. Second, let's say that we find the money and we have access to capital, and it is quite easy to do all the studies and all the necessary structuring work, because we have a skill set for that one. Where the problem starts, you have all the studies and you start the negotiation, and you have the government on the other side. I think we are talking here in Chatham rules, so I can be open. So 2 issues. One is the capacity issue. I mean, in some places, you don't have counterpart to discuss. And second issue is decision making. Either very slow decision making or not making a decision. In one country, we waited for a decision for 2 years. In another country, where we are developing this project and you are involved, Kevin, the country is buying electricity in average 28 cents, and our project is going to produce 4.5 cents, and we were found very expensive. And 3 years break. 3 years later, we came back to the table, but too late. Today's financing world is different, more expensive. After Ukraine and COVID, although, materials are more expensive, so project is more expensive. We cannot even offer anymore 4.5 cents. So I think it is extremely important to see the commitment of both parties and how to work hand to hand and understand actually what are very important. In another example, we have one project in West African country. I think I can talk about it in Gambia. We started only 9 months ago. And because project is followed by every party, sponsors, lenders, investors, and the government, we are about to start the construction. So it means it can be done. The other issue is actually political challenges. In one project, we work with 6 ministers. And when each minister comes, you have to explain from the beginning what needs to be done. I think it is extremely, sad to basically see this, because if everyone commits, if everyone understands and takes from where it is, I think we can go much more faster. The other challenge we face is actually transparent and predictable legal frameworks in the countries. Sometimes, you can go fast in project development, but you are stuck with these legal frameworks, specifically when it comes to the land rights and land-related issues. In one project in Kenya, we dropped the project because after 18 months, nobody was able to find a solution. So sad, because we worked on that project 18 months. The other matter is still, after all these years, I am in Africa, almost like 18 years, we are still talking about bankability of the utilities, unfortunately. I mean, we always find some solutions around those, but this is still there. And unfortunately, not in every country you can access to PRGs, because PRGs are tied to certain country programming and certain time frames. So I think one more issue, and I will stop here, that is the returns. Returns are still coming down, and investors are leaving Africa. I am very sad to talk about this, because working at African Development Bank and then touching many projects in the past, and then really fighting to bring private sector in the continent, I am sad that people are leaving. One of the reasons they are leaving, actually, they don't see the result. They don't see the result in quick time frame. So we need more patient capital, and we have to work on more patient capital. Let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Taz. But the truth is, despite the challenges that you've spoken about, you have some decent projects that are in operation. So we love your tenacity and staying power. I think time is really running short, yeah. So I'll go straight to Wale Shonibare. And we try to be concise here. You are involved in the financing of many privately financed grid-scale renewable energy projects in Africa. Based on your experience, what would you say are the 3 main impediments to the flow of these investments on the continent? And whilst there, how have you tried, and I say you, us as AFDB, how have we tried to address these impediments?
Thank you very much, Kevin. Yes, it's very difficult to narrow to 3, but if I had to give some of the biggest issues, first of all, and Taz mentioned it, the sustainability of our utilities. Most of the utilities in Africa are technically insolvent. And as a result of that, it's very difficult to close a deal with a buyer that is not able to pay. So every time the developers are asking for government guarantees. And there's a limit to the number of guarantees a government can sign because it counts as contingent liabilities on the government balance sheet. And these days, many of our countries are hitting their debt sustainability limits. So you find that every country we're going to, you're doing demonstration projects. You may do 1 or 2 projects because the government can give you a guarantee, but you cannot scale because you cannot get guarantees for everything. So when people say, yes, projects don't default in Africa, yeah, why should they default? We overstructure our projects in Africa. And if you overstructure, it's not going to default, but you won't have many of those projects. That's just the basic issue, which means we have to find a way of making our utilities sustainable, reforming the utilities, making the tariffs cost reflective. And these are programs that we're already working on at the bank. And also we have to move away from this idea of a single buyer model because you will need to be able to trade electricity. That's why African Development Bank is building regional interconnectors, and we are supporting regional power pools. Because if you don't have to sell to one single buyer and you can sell into a pool, a merchant market, like it happens in Europe and other parts of the world, then these projects become more financeable without the need for a government guarantee. The second point, and the biggest elephant in the room that we don't talk about enough, is currency. You cannot, in a situation where you're collecting local currency, be borrowing hard currency for 15, 20 years. In some countries, you don't know what the exchange rate is going to be next week, not to talk about what it's going to be in 15 years. And you cannot pass that across to your consumers all the time. So we have to come up with more innovative ways of mobilizing domestic capital. And that's, again, something that we've been working on at the bank. The bank was involved as the founding shareholder of the Africa Guarantee Fund, where you guarantee the portfolios of local banks who are investing in certain areas, including green technology. The other ways is mobilizing, blended finance, creating first loss to absorb some of this devaluations, and also involved in the first listed local currency infrastructure fund in Nigeria, for instance, where for the first time you can get to a tenure of 15, 20 years rather than being limited by the 7 years that the local banks are able to do. So really important. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing, we talked about creating the enabling environment, creating the policies, creating the regulation, creating information and knowledge, because you cannot invest without information. The African Development Bank launched the first electricity regulatory index on the continent, which benchmarks the regulatory environment of our countries against international best practice. And we use that to channel technical assistance into countries haven't identified the gaps in order to allow investment to flow. So these are some of the ways in which we're looking to make the environment relevant. But my last point is, if you want to scale and make the sector sustainable, you have to be able to mobilize local capital. That's the only long-term solution. So what we're doing right now, we're doing experimental pilot projects in many of our countries. The most successful programs on the continent, like in South Africa, we finance everything in rand, and it makes sense. Thank you.
Well, I'll not let you go that quickly, because right now we have the hottest topic globally on investments. And this is Mission 300, if I were to call it that way. How do you think this initiative will help us ramp up green energy investments in Africa? In 1 minute.
Yeah, Mission 300 is something that I'm very proud to be part of. It's a very ambitious initiative. For the first time, we're mobilizing government to sign up to some core principles. If we can get those core principles in place, we'll be able to attract more investment. First of all, least cost generation. You have to be able to procure the least cost electricity mix, which is very important. Secondly, it's important, I talked about utilities. We're mobilizing our leaders to sign up to those core principles, the regional interconnectors, mobilizing private sector, renewable energy priority. Once they're coming to Tanzania at the end of January, at the Heads of State Summit, to sign a declaration. And this is a show of seriousness, because Taz talked about political commitment and alignment. There's signaling to the private sector, to regional partners and local partners, to say, we understand what we need to do now. And it's serious. And we're working with countries to develop national compacts to translate the high-level Heads of State declaration into actual practical projects. And so mobilizing the partnership, that's the key difference. And it's something that we haven't done on the continent today, working ourselves on the World Bank and other supporters such as Rockefeller and SA4All, bringing everything, and donor coordination. Very, very important that we all act together rather than either competing or being at cross purposes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Wale. I think that was very articulate. I know how central you are involved in that process. Lastly, Richard, given USAID's extensive experience through Power Africa initiative, what are the most effective strategies you've identified for overcoming the primary barriers for renewable energy investment in African countries, particularly in addressing challenges like infrastructure limitations, regulatory uncertainties, which Wale has talked about, and the perceived risk by international investors?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, and I appreciate being on this panel and the really extensive experience that's represented up here. It's interesting, my response is almost exactly what Wale was. I think he captured it very well in terms of what those barriers are. As I was thinking about this question and how to respond to it, you have to think of it in a logical way, right? In my experience in dealing with these institutional investors, international investors globally, there's a lot of money and a lot of interest in investing in Africa. There is no shortage of money. So what is keeping it from coming here? And I think Wale hit it on the head, where there is just, we hear about no bankable projects, but really what does that mean? It means that you've got utilities that are insolvent and cannot be an effective counterparty to a long-term agreement. You've got African countries that, because of their debt burdens and their fiscal situations, are unable to provide those guarantees in the long run. They're just not able to do that. Then when you're talking about off-grid and you're trying to reach out into those rural areas, you've got consumers and small businesses that maybe can pay a little, but not enough to cover all your costs. So at every point, you've got consumers, customers that are just unable to pay and to cover the costs of producing all the electricity, including all the distribution. And then on top of that, you do have some misinformed misperceptions about the risks. And I think it is on both sides. You've got international investors and others who perceive risk that's not there. I think you have African governments that see private sector and they see risks or they see opportunities that are not there. I was meeting with someone in the DRC recently who was working with mini-grid developers, and over half of their costs for these mini-grid developers are associated with fees, tariffs, taxes, other things. And I think that's due to the government thinking that these international companies have deep pockets and they're making a lot of money and therefore they can afford to pay these. When in actuality, it's driving them away and they're probably going to go out of business in many cases. And so I think there's some adjustments that need to be made there. So what does that leave us? How do you do this work? Well, you've got industry on the continent that can pay, that can be effective off-takers, and so you see a lot of effort right now in focusing on the C&I space, where you can find mines or large industry who can pay, who want reliable power, and you see companies going that direction. You see some that are trying to figure out working with smaller businesses who can pay, who are being effective. That's more challenging. And then you've got the option of working with international development institutions who provide concessional capital and guarantees and subsidized support to help reduce that cost. And then you have us and many of us who are working on trying to change those risk perceptions as well. So what is Power Africa doing about all of this, right, and these challenges? We're trying to address these challenges in different ways. Number one, in terms of dealing with utilities, we do have technical advisors embedded with utilities to try and help them think through strategies to become more efficient. We had a project in Nigeria recently that worked on helping them install smart meters that allowed them more visibility into their consumers and customers, that allowed them to generate an additional $250 million in revenue, which goes a long way toward them becoming more solvent, that they can put into actually entering into long-term agreements with generators. On the knowledge side, in building capacity, we've worked with our Commercial Law Development Partner Program and CEFA also, the Sustainable Energy for All Fund, to actually develop an understanding series that helps demystify how to develop some of these projects in ways that can work and have been proven to work on the continent. And finally, we're also working with US companies, bringing them to the continent to try and help to demystify this continent to them, to show them those opportunities. And I think it's going to take a combined effort on all of our parts to work in each aspect of that, of those issues that Wally so eloquently described, to be able to start to overcome those barriers. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to take creativity. But that's a space that I think Power Africa is deep into, and we're going to be here in the long run to really try and support that progress.
Thank you very much, Richard. Indeed, what you ended up with, that is one of the foundational aspects of the Mission 300, which is to start to work with all partners to ensure that we have a coherent and set of policies that ensure that we will not be able to undertake business as usual. It will be able to expedite and accelerate, as Alain was talking about, how we are able to connect to increase the access to electricity. So I think we've had more from grid-based generation, but we also had a panelist who was supposed to address distributed renewable energy, which is a very important part of Mission 300, because we do believe by 2030, at least 50% of new connections will have to come through distributed renewable energies. And it is actually one of the important pillars of Mission 300. So we have a short video. Maybe we'll not play it to the very end. I had an interview with the the founder and president of Ignite. I think you'll find it very, very interesting. Let's play the video before we wrap up the panel. Good morning, Angela.
Good morning, Kevin.
It is a pity we will miss you in Rabat, but I'm sure that our virtual exchanges will enrich the session on investing in Africa's green energy future. To start with, let me ask you one question. You would be aware of the African Development Bank and the World Bank's initiative to provide electricity access to an additional 300 million people by 2030. What would you expect to be the role of renewables and multilateral development banks in this regard?
Kevin, thank you so much for having me today. And again, I really deeply apologize for not being with you all in person. This is an extremely important gathering with key stakeholders for the future of energy in Africa. So I hope to be there next time, and hopefully we'll see you soon enough in another setting. Delighted to still join you remotely. Let me answer this first question. So really, I believe that MDBs really have a very important role and a very kind of like key power here to position distributed renewable as a cornerstone of the future of power systems on the continent. Distributed renewable energy solution, like solar system, like mini grids, are modular, they're scalable, they are deployable in off-grid markets, and they offer the fastest path to universal electrification on the continent. But more than that, they're also superior in many respects to what we've seen in Western energy system. They are more resilient. They're obviously clean and inclusive when they're made really truly affordable by the operators. And Africa, again, here, I think, can really leapfrog and even show the West the path to follow eventually. This is the way. MDB have multiple tools in their hands in order to make that a reality. First, they are very much catalytic actors. Private sector cannot do it alone for multiple reasons linked to risk that we could cover. MDBs can help with both the perceived risk and as well the relative real risk of those projects versus other competition for capital that you could see in different markets globally. So we can leverage blended finance structures, concessional capital, first loss guarantees. There's a range of tools that exist here, but not only to make it happen, but importantly to make it happen faster and really urgently. One of the tools that we believe is extremely important is result-based financing, RBF. In my opinion, this is the highest leverage instrument, which has no waste of donor money with it and no distortion of markets with it. It can enable cost-efficient energy access at just a few dollars per person when well set up with the right partners, and it ensure measurable outcomes and accountability of all the different partners involved in the deployment. Also, another point which I would like to comment on, which is extremely important, is collaborative leadership. And with the MDBs really leading the charge with that. Ignite works closely with MDBs, and that's helped like harmonize policy frameworks, ensure alignment of incentive that attract private sector participation more and more in private capital, and foster innovation ecosystem. We really believe that radical collaboration is key, and that will help us achieve our shared goal faster and better.
Thank you. So, my second question, do you envisage Ignite playing a role in Mission 300 as the initiative is branded? And if so, what strategies do you plan to employ to contribute towards bridging the energy access gap?
Kevin, on that, it's very easy. We are 100% aligned, 100%. Our vision at Ignite is to power 100 million people in Africa before 2030. So that would be contributing to about a third of your target. And that's our base case scenario. You can probably even do more. what's key in order to achieve that? Obviously, affordability is at the heart of our energy access objectives success, right? Ignite's strategy is really building the distributed renewable sector, the DRE sector, as the future of power infrastructure. And those words are important, power infrastructure. If you think about it as being a power infrastructure, it means it's rooted into, first of all, MDB and government partnership with private sector, like any other power structure in the world. Secondly, affordability to end customer with energy as a service is extremely important. And finally, it's like, that almost boring, I would say, good old professionalism, replicability, and standardization of projects and of operation. And those are keys in order to achieve our scalability and our goal. It's about the quantity of people that we will serve with quality solution. It's about the coverage that we will achieve, and it's about having lean and optimized operation to make that sustainable. What's key to get that done? First, what we call MRV systems. They're key. Monitoring, reporting, and verification system. Ignite's development and integration of MRV systems as a cornerstone of its business model provides like granular performance data. It reduces operational inefficiency through the whole value chain, all the way from production to distribution and monitoring. And it builds stakeholder confidence by having transparent and verifiable metrics throughout its operation. In Mozambique, just over the last year, we deployed solar system for over 100,000 households within less than a year, and we delivered tangible improvement on education outcome, on healthcare services, on micro enterprises productivity, and that's just for one country. Another point that is extremely important, and that's again another area of partnership together, is workforce localization. It's extremely important. Through joint capacity building programs with MDBs and private sector, Ignite developed local technical expertise, and we really are there to create a sustainable talents pipeline that will stay there, maintain, scale systems, and operate those new industries that are the industries of the future in the continent. In brief, Ignite is ready to deliver on Mission 300 goals and to play a really meaningful part. And we can run as fast as our partners can. We're ready for it.
Thank you very much. But what is the difference from traditional energy access approaches? Specifically, how are these strategies different for purposes of accelerated scaling up affordable and sustainable energy solutions in Africa?
That's a great question, because I think that question is actually at the heart of there's been a lot of efforts that have been done in the last decades plus, and everybody knows that this is an important challenge and problem that needs to be solved yesterday. Yet, we're not there yet, and hopefully we will now, just in a few years, change that. So it must be about something to be done differently. And here we are really focused on decentralized and at Ignite on decentralized and scalable models for critical infrastructure. So Ignite focuses on standalone solar solution and solar system, but end-to-end solution, all the way from small homes to SMEs and small business to larger like users of energy. End-to-end solution, but standalone system. Also, we deploy the productive use of those systems, which is, for example, solar water pumps, which we think is a critical infrastructure as well. And that helped bypass the traditional grid dependencies in order to get our objectives. And that means that we kind of bypass quite a few obstacles that unfortunately have led to having still an infrastructure gap on the continent. And that will ensure that we have rapid deployment in all our markets. So working hand in hand with our MDB partners through RBF, for example, again, with just about $7 per person, this is what we calculated tax, RBF-backed models enable a cost capital efficient, outcomes-driven, much faster scaling. This is mirroring the concept. If you look at those that are used to more traditional old-school infrastructure, this is really mirroring the concept of having good rated offtake agreements. And that's the model that centralized infrastructure use that can be really replicated at rather low cost per home and per people served or the distributed infrastructure model.
I think we can
and that's
stop it
offering
now.
a sustainable mechanism to deliver energy access at scale. One important point again that I'd like to sort of...
So I think I see our next panel is here. So very, very briefly, for half a minute for each of you, kindly give us a parting shot on how you think that, what your crystal ball tells you about Africa's green energy future. Starting with Fatma from the very end.
Well, we've talked about many challenges that we need all to gather, to have the right answer and solutions for those countries. But I would say that I see more all the opportunities that we have mentioned down the line, with at the end so many population with no access to energy today, with renewable energy, be it on off-grid or other type of solution, a key response to all those populations, to industries. So my main takeaway, I think, is we have seen many partners here in the panel or around this summit. These common actions would definitely by bringing together public and private around green energy solutions. That's, I think, the future for our continent. And we are all engaged here in Morocco to, contribute to that as well. Thank you.
Owale?
For me, the key word is sustainability. We talk about sustainable energy, we need sustainable financing, we need sustainable utilities, sustainable power systems. Everything has to be done from first principles. So if we keep that in mind, I think we'll be able to scale, not just do demonstration projects. Thank you
very much. Taz?
I will be very quick. I mean, partnership in very large projects, and then I think off-grid could be done a different way, but less partner to deliver big ones for the base load.
Thank you. Richard?
I think interconnectivity among countries, better utilities, connecting people to the grid, and I also think partnership through that interconnectivity, and I think through that interconnectivity, competition that helps to lower that, and that can happen if there's better interconnectivity.
Thank you. Dr. Bouldin?
Right. Better implementation should be within a systems approach. And that system means that the Mission 300 needs to be within the inclusive, sustainable growth of the country. It needs to be mindful as well to measure disruption that could come from the CBAM, the Cross-Border Adjustment Mechanism of Europe. So these technologies need really to be with low emissions. It needs to be mindful to competitiveness, including from the spillovers of the new industrial policies, including the IRA of the US, which may continue under a different name. It needs to factor in the new advances of our knowledge today, and it's good to see a session on sustainable innovative solutions, because there have been some advances, including in the carbon credit markets and risk mitigation mechanisms, that we need to factor them in all of the solutions to minimize the risk and enhance the opportunities, not just for the sector of the transactions, but for the whole people.
I think, in conclusion, I think with the panel that we have here, we've had wonderful things. I believe that the future of Africa is indeed green. And on that note, I'll invite you all to give this wonderful panel a hearty loud of appreciation. Thank you very much.